I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see the world, how I see the future, and hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense for how the current operates. If you can, turn around. Some of the older people, they're above 50s, they won't be able to turn around their necks that easily. But if you want to turn around, please have a look at the top figure at the back. So that is the world population. Look at the right side on the top. That is the pace at which babies are born as we sit here today. So 7.6 billion people currently in the world. So think about it. As you see people dying, going back and forward. And we will look at that again by the time we're done. So 430, so let me, don't do some of our previous politicians, but it's like 7, 6, 4, 4, 3, 5, 7, 4, 8, 4, 5, 7 at this point in time. So we'll look at it again when we're done. How long do I have, Krista? 10 minutes? Ah, okay. So make yourself comfortable. So just a question. How many people will be on the continent of Africa by the year 2050? This is an old saying. How many people do you think will be on the African continent by the year 2050? How many people will we add from now to the year 2050? So about another billion people in the next 22 years. So if you think about it, 32 years. If you think about it, we're currently just over a billion people here, so almost doubling the African population by the year 2050. So if you think about that in the world context, currently you have 83 million people being added to the world population every year. So think about South Africa's population of about 55 million people. So you think 1.5 times South Africa's population in the next, every year. So every year we add that many people to South Africa, to the world. So it's interesting if you think about that and you think about consumption and you think about where consumption is going to go to and what's going to happen to people in the world and what's going to happen to the countries in the world and how governments need to look after those people. It's also interesting if you look at the world population and the age of that world population going forward, what is happening to that world population over time. So if you look at some of the European countries now, the people over the age of 60 are actually more than the children under the age of 16, which means that your social responsibility from governments becomes more difficult because in time, the people like you and I earning salaries and paying taxes is becoming lesser to support a higher population. So as you know, people grow older. They say in 2011, they said the first person who's going to turn 140 years old has already been born. It's not going to be me. Maybe Tinus, he looks very good for 60. Hey, Tinus, where's Tinus? There at the back.
You said I can't turn my neck. I can't even see.
So it's interesting to then look at the world population and say, okay, what's going to happen if you think about it? What's going to happen just purely from a governmental point of view, from social grants point of view? South Africa, 17 million people we're supporting social grants. If you think about the South African population, 55 million people, let's say in the year 2050 we add another 50%, so we're 85 million people. How many of those people can actually work? How many of those people can actually look after their kids? How many of those people are actually not going to have work in this country? And then escalate that into the world environment and say, okay, 8.5 billion people or 9 billion people in the year 2050. That's what they suggest, is 9 billion people on the continent. So you can understand that. Now I want you to leave that thought on the one side. And let's talk about debt. How much debt does the world owe, do you think, currently? If you look, not you and I, governments. What's the governmental debt worldwide at this point in time? All the governments combined. Take a stab. What do you think? Trillion? How many trillions? To give you a bit of a perspective, South Africa's debt alone is just over 3 trillion. So how much would you think the world is? Okay, I'll help you out. $63 trillion, US dollars. Our debt is rands, by the way. So 63 trillion US dollars, world debt. So about 20 to 21 trillion of that is US debt. China is about 6 trillion. Japan is about 11 trillion. So it's interesting if you then compare that to GDP of those countries. US is about 106% of their GDP they have in debt. Now it's interesting, you need to understand GDP. Obviously, it's your gross domestic product. So if you look at your GDP for that specific country, that's not the income of the country. That's the income of the population and the products being produced. So it's different to the income for the government. So obviously, where do they get their income from? Primarily from taxes, duties, etc. But if you think about your own, if you bring it down to your own budget, if you earn 100,000, let's take Herman's budget. He earns 100,000 a year. That's about right. that's what his wife thinks. So he earns about 100,000 a year. Obviously, he needs to pay taxes, he needs to pay rent. He needs to pay rent, he needs to pay petrol, he needs to pay food, clothing for the boys, and then a nice present for his wife on his birthday. So by the end of that time, he's paying taxes of, let's say, 10,000. So that's the income of government. So if you compare GDP to the actual income that they receive, the governments receive, it's much lower. So I don't know what it's now. At one stage, probably about 5 years ago, I know that the US debt was running about $30 billion a day of interest. So whatever it is now, I don't know. But you can imagine the amount of income that you need to generate from taxes and duties and whatever in order to service that debt is huge. Now think about it in other terms. If you take countries like China, even though they have 6 or 7 trillion of dollars of debt, that debt as percentage to their GDP is much lower. It's in the 50s. South Africa is 53% actually, our debt to our GDP. But you have countries like who's the world's most indebted country? Who knows? Japan. 233% of their GDP in debt. That's historical because that comes out of the World War II and they had to rebuild. So, but interestingly, if you now take the world population and you combine it with total debt and the repayment of that debt, it's interesting to think what the world is going to look like 10, 15, 20 years from now. So if you think about our children and our grandchildren, Tina's grandchildren, you know, it's interesting to think how is life going to look like for them? Now let's park that as a second thing. Now the third thing I want to talk to you is artificial intelligence. Who knows what artificial intelligence is? Who wants to take a step? Yes.
It's basically the robots are taking over from people with each plane.
Yeah, that's very simplistically, but it's in a sense true. Wilna, wat dink jy? Okay, so artificial intelligence is basically machine learning. So it's effectively saying that instead of writing in the old days, who did programming, instead of writing a program for a simple game so that you can play Tetris or whatever we used to play in our days, they now move to a place where the computer they create can actually learn by itself. So I saw a YouTube video, and this is now 2 years ago at a conference, where they created it's just a black box. It's just literally a small square with 4 legs. And they basically left this machine on its own, plugged it in because it didn't have a battery at the time. And they left this machine to learn how to walk by itself. They took that machine about 24 hours to learn how to walk by its own, without programming. So then what they did is they actually took one of the legs off and they left it again. It took it about 12 hours to learn how to walk on 3 legs. So it's interesting if you then compare that to say, okay, what is happening in the world? So you may know there's a YouTube video, and John Deere shared it with us last year, that they actually bought a company that created a machine that can run across a field of corn and then spray that field of corn with chemicals or fertilizer. But the eye of the machine actually, instead of just spraying every piece of, or the whole land, they can actually identify the difference between what is wheat or onkruid and what is actual plant. And they can only spray the wheat and not the plant. They can also get them to understand how healthy that maize plant is, whether it's healthy, whether it needs fertilizer or pesticides or not. They project, in our discussion, that they can probably save about 90%, 90% of cost on things like chemical on a farmland. So it's interesting if you look at that. Let's then take 3D printing. You know that some of your Airbus's parts currently of the Airbus aircraft is already printed by a 3D printer instead of coming out of a factory. So if you then look at these three areas, in other words, if you look at population growth, which is now 764435897, don't look back, Tingus, then you can understand what's going to happen to the population growth. If you then combine that to US or to global debt figures, we're going to get to probably 100 trillion before 2050. And you compare that to artificial intelligence. Where do you think that's going to leave people like you and I? What's going to happen to our children? It's interesting. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But what I do know is somehow you guys sitting here and myself, we need to cater for that type of environment. And we need to think by ourselves, how do you then, taking that to our space, position yourself in terms of company, position yourself in terms of your children, position yourself in terms of what you teach them. You know, my wife and I, we used to, coming out of environment, you have to go to varsity, you have to get a degree. You know, please become a CA, you know, so that you can, they earn a lot of money. You know, theologists earn a bit more, but sometimes the CA is a lot of money. But you understand what I'm saying? So where do you guide your child in terms of what he needs to study today to prepare him for a world of this environment? Because they say that 50% of the work that they will do in the next 5 years of our type of jobs that's not actually in existence today. So how many of you have heard about a drone operator 5 years ago? How many of you have heard about a data engineer 5 years ago? Or a data analyst 5 years ago? So those things are not there. So how do you prepare yourself and your children for actually understanding that world and prepare for that world? And I ask myself this question often because I have, as you know, 4 children, 3 of them boys that challenge everything that we do. Wonderful children, but they're obviously in a world where they spend more time on the phone, where they spend more time playing games, where they spend more time communicating. So about 4 years ago, I sat in a talk like this, and a CEO of, I think, a company's world is Future World is the company's name, and he was explaining about how you can how they implanted chips, cell phone chips, in the system of a person, so that you can actually phone by just thinking, dialing Krista. Can you imagine? I'll speak to you and I'll tell you what Maurice needs to know. It's just, can you imagine that environment where you're going to? So your cell phone, if you think about it, this phone can carry everything. So as you know, you can do your payments on this phone. You don't need a card anymore. So you can do everything on this thing. Now can you imagine if they can take this and plant it into your body? Then you don't need anything. So that's already happening. So some of the teenagers in a place like Germany, if you go in there, they already scan you. They already have a chip in their arm. They scan you. You go in. When you enter, when you get close to the bar, they can see it comes up to the screen. Who is this person? What is his bank balance? What is his ID number? So can you imagine the world that we're living in? But we don't know that because, in a sense, we're so focused and so busy in terms of our current environment. But now you need to take that world. You need to understand how you position your company going forward. So how do you do that? Where's Jacob? Jacob, give me your wisdom. What do you think? What do you think? Tell me. Joe, what do you think? How would you prepare for a company of this, looking at that world?
It's actually a very difficult one because if you look at these challenges that you just mentioned, it's probably, a very challenging one. It's something to think about.
So I have a dear boy, Montgomery Shores, is a friend of one of my boys, and he was at a scholarship with one of the big fund managers, and they invited them for a week just, you know, almost training or development. And he sat in a meeting and they actually gave them those, I actually asked this question to him, go away for an hour and prepare a presentation on what is the type of work, job description, that you would be able to do in 5 years from now, taking into consideration artificial intelligence. So what does a computer not, what would a computer not be able to do 5 years from now? Or 10 years from now?
Emotions.
Emotions. That was about the only one. So if you're a psychologist, you're in the right, you've got the right job description. But in emotions, so it's interesting. So you need to think, and we need to think how we develop. Because remember, you have the brain to develop an artificial intelligence machine. So the thing is, we need to develop ourselves more completely as an individual to get to that point. So the historical way of developing you as a person. So my thinking is, and I'm speaking to the managers and the seniors here, is my thinking is what we need to do as a company, we need to make sure that we develop and we need to create more and more opportunities for our staff to be more developed, to understand more how the world is going to change. So that when you come up, I do think that we will have less people in 10 years from now, because you will have computers doing certain things. Can you imagine? Let's take John Deere as a very good example. If you get to a point where John Deere can actually have a 3D printer here that can print on demand a spare part for John Deere tractor. Think about it. No more huge warehouses, no more manufacturing staff. Can you imagine? So can you imagine that? I've seen there's a YouTube video, you must actually go and have a look at it, of a 3D printer printing a house. I think it took 3 days or something. It's this huge machine. It looks like these cranes that you get on the ports, where they lift up the container, so it's with the 2 legs. So it looks like that. They literally put it up, got rails on the side, and this thing started printing. So I can't remember how many days, but after a couple of days, you have full house printed. It's interesting. So can you imagine the impact in our social environment and how we need to cater for that? Okay, so how do we do it? We spend obviously a lot of time praying. Because I do think that there is a God that knows more than we do in terms of where we're going to sit in 5 years. But the reality is you need to become agile. I know that I spoke about this previous time, but I need to talk about it a little bit more in terms of how do we focus. Because in a sense, what you think about yourself is a lot of these things that we understand today is going to move into the digital environment. And fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunate in the sense that the world out there, if you look at the States, are miles and miles ahead of us. So why is it fortunate? It's fortunate in a sense because we can have a look at what they're doing and in a sense expect what's going to come our way. You know? So what is happening in the States and in China and in Europe is going to happen here at some point in time. You know? Let's take drone delivery. So how many people can expect that you won't have a DHL vehicle coming here to deliver a package? Why don't you just have a drone parking in front, leave your package, and disappear? You know? How many of you have ever flown a drone before? Or seen how it's flown before? So my son bought one. It was supposed to be mine, but in any event, I just paid for it. But he bought this drone. It's an amazing thing. It's a little thing like this, literally like this. So he lands the drone in his hand. So it flies, he can hold his hand, it's got sensors, he lands perfectly in his hand without any problem. You can send the thing can go at 75 kilometers per hour. It goes 100, and it's not expensive, 16,000 rand. It's expensive, but what I mean is it's not hundreds of thousands rand, and it becomes cheaper and cheaper as we speak. So it's interesting if you then look at this thing, goes out 1.7 kilometers on its own. You press a button, come home, and it comes home and lands in his hand. So that's the technology that you have, and it takes a 4K, very high definition photo or video as it goes along. So it's unbelievable what these things can do. So companies like Amazon is already testing how they can deliver up to 80 kilograms on drones. And so can you imagine the impact on your regulatory environment, your air regulatory environment? So it's interesting to see how the world is moving. Driverless cars. I mean, Uber said I can't remember the amount of years that they said, but their objective is to have driverless cars in all the Ubers around the world. So imagine the impact on taxi drivers. Now there's a reality between what they can do and obviously the social impact and the social reaction. And we have seen the social reaction on Uber around the world. So there's obviously that disconnect sometimes. But over time, you will get used to it. So what we do in terms of looking at the future is really understanding what our business is and understanding that we need to position ourselves differently. So when we talk about creating platforms, we try to become agile enough so that we can create those platforms. So if you look, so the way that I approach this is to say that the one platform that we need to have is so that you can move some of your assets and some of your heavy assets, like, I don't know, some of your storage facilities or some of your buildings into certain environments so that you quickly can move those assets into an investment vehicle or whatever. So you need to look at the assets that you have in a company. That's my approach. To say how quickly can you get either withdraw or extract value from those assets if the environment changes quickly, or what you do with those assets. So that's the one thing, because in a sense you need to become agile. So what I mean by agile is that if you walk south and suddenly there's a rock in a road or there's a pothole, you need to be able to move quite fast. I've said this before to many of the talks that I do. If you look at the movie Titanic, it was recently again on Mnet. It was always interesting for me when I realized it watching the movie. There's some nice scenes, but let's forget about the nice scenes. But if you look at the actual problem, what happened and them hitting the iceberg, they actually saw the iceberg. They actually did see it, but they were too fast and they were too slow to turn. And that's almost a process that I'm challenging myself in a sense, is to say, how quickly can you turn your business model into not necessarily completely something else, because remember, we're still food and agri, so we can't get out of food and agri and now suddenly become, property developers. That's not what we intend doing. But how can you turn your business model fairly quickly from where you're currently sitting into something which is more adaptable to your environment? So a lot of the work that we're trying to do, financial services and buying a bank, is a very good example of that, because we believe that your financial services opportunity that you need to provide to your farmers needs to look different a year from now than what it looks currently today. And that's really why we're trying to do this. So in a sense, you start to challenge yourself in disrupting your own environment. Let's talk about farming for starters. What is the impact of urban farming going to be in South Africa? So let's think about just delivery herbs to people like ShopRite and Woolies. A lot of that can be produced in containers or in urban farming. I have a guy, I mentioned it last time as well, I have a person that's literally a kilometer away from me in the city, have this huge hothouse where we produce salads for Woolies. So can you imagine having that in the States? In Brooklyn, they actually converted the warehouse into a production site for herbs and for salads and for vegetables. So can you imagine the impact of that type of farming? It's controlled, it's environmentally controlled, climate controlled, water efficient, much better than normal farming. So there's a huge potential risk for a vegetable farmer, as an example, than there was like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And that's the world we're living in. The one great thing about humans is that we are in a position where we adapt. If you put in a difficult position, you adapt. We all do that. If you take Edward as a very good example. A lovely person from Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast is a beautiful country. Came to South Africa, and what did he do? He adapted. All of us do that. So the moment that you're in a scenario, when you go into a new job, you have to adjust. And that is what we're doing. The thing that we don't know is how some of your competitors going to react and adapt to the current environment. Are they going to do it better than we are doing it currently? And that's the thing. So you need to challenge yourself looking forward the whole time. So when I when I came up with understanding the future, it's not necessarily an intention of saying, okay, how do I read the future? That's not the intention. The intention is to say, if you look at all these trends around us, in terms of population, the challenge that's going to be on products. Now, there are people saying that they don't think there's going to be a shortage of food in the world because of things such as vertical production, because of the way that we adapt and adjust. So those things are going to happen, and we're all going to start, and there are always going to be business people like us that's going to try and find that opportunity that can say, okay, this opportunity is going to help us to understand the future better. So the way that we look at it, without going into much detail of strategy, just to remind ourselves, we're creating platforms, or we hope to create platforms, like an asset finance platform, or like a banking platform, or like a food platform, so that you easily can adjust these platforms as you go along. Instead of having a huge operational platform, where everything sits in operation, our IT systems needs to be much more efficient, needs to be adjusted to where we're going. Your platforms need to operate, your banking platforms, your digital platform needs to run sufficiently. So the bank that we bought, Bank of Athens, if you go into their branch, it's completely cashless branch, so you won't be able to draw cash there. So all your payments, everything is done digital. So you can imagine having your digital process for banking platform together with your input process and your output process on the same digital platform. So that's what we're trying to do, is to focus a little bit more into the future, to say, in order how we understand the future, how can we adjust? But it doesn't not necessarily say that we have the answers, because there are challenges that we're going to face from a people's point of view, from an adjustment point of view, from a world point of view, that we're not necessarily prepared for. As long as we're prepared as a company to be able to move faster than our competitor. That's the challenge. But reality is that we still need to you still need to be able to produce a product on farm. You still need to be able to move that product. You still need to be able for vegetable farm to compete with whatever comes up. So those things are still, in South Africa, as I said, the infrastructure and the language in some areas are much slower than other areas. So you would have time to adjust. But my thinking is, if you're not disrupting yourself in future, you're going to be left behind. It's really the case. If we don't think about the opportunity of disrupting ourselves, it's painful, I know that. It's not easy to disrupt yourself, because disrupting yourself means change. You don't like change, I don't like change. I drive change, hey Zelda, but I don't like. Zelda loves change. But you understand. So that's the challenge that we have, and that I want to almost put to you, to say, think a little bit about the future when you make decisions in terms of your kids' training, your personal environment first. Think about how your personal environment is. Think about where our country is going. I was at the talk last night where the president spoke, and I must say I was actually encouraged the way that he spoke. He did speak about land transformation, but it was amazing to understand the pragmatic approach that he has in terms of transformation and redistribution. And there's obviously lots of noise out there. 50% valuable, other 50% incorrect. But it's important to understand that from our point of view, you need to sit down, sometimes take a step backwards. I would say close your door and pray for 5 hours. And then you will get a bit of a sense for what you need to do going forward. And I think that's the important thing. That's my challenge for you. Is I shared it at the talk the other day, and I said it at our awards evening last year, is that we shouldn't get comfortable in our deserts that we're in. And for those of you who've heard it before, I apologize. But what I mean by that is that, and sorry to you for using a biblical story, but if you look at Israel, when they were actually traveling around the desert, before they crossed the Jordan, the Lord provided for them a cloud so that they don't get hot, so they're not in the sun all day. They had food every day, they had water every day. And in a sense, that's the desert that sometimes we find ourselves in. And we find it happens whether, it happens in our personal lives, where we get comfortable with the uncomfortable. We get comfortable with the things that's challenging, but it happens so long that we're okay with it. And I almost want to challenge you to think forward, to say, okay, how can you get out of this desert, and then make those decisions? So in our sense, what we challenge ourselves as a management team is to say, okay, how can we get out of a desert of the current environment into hopefully a new promised land, if I can use the word, into a new area of operation, into a new area of business, into a new area of thinking more technically advanced, thinking more, platforms, thinking more agile movements. So that is really the way that we're thinking about the business. I think just 2 points. The most difficult part, I imagine from a business point of view, and what I realized over the last 5 years is that sometimes to find the balance between when you disrupt yourself and actually the market being ready for that disruption, there's sometimes a gap in those two. Because what I realized in some fantastic and brilliant ideas that we had in the past, that just the market just wasn't ready for it. And it happens. So trying to find that balance, because when you disrupt yourself, you actually means that one leg of a business you make redundant. And if the market is not ready for that, it actually can be detrimental. So always finding that balance. The other point that you make is also valid in terms of creativity. So how many of us are creative? I mean, it's not something that we necessarily exercise or practice. You know, when you think about it, it's not that we practice being our creative side of life. We normally get into this process, and that's how we operate. We like, to understand our world. But there's no, if I say to you today, if you come in tomorrow, your work is done. You don't have a job tomorrow. But I'll give you 6 months to come up with a new idea for a new job. It means that you will be forced to be creative. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just using that as an example. So please don't carry out here and say, well, we need you all tomorrow, so please. But all I'm just saying as an example, if you force yourself to be creative, we had this innovation process, which we started, I don't even know, 3-4 years ago. We started with innovative ideas. I mean, yes, we actually received a lot of good ideas, but a lot of those ideas were actually in terms of bettering current systems. Very few of them were actually disruptive ideas of saying, why don't we do this? And I think that's the thing, is that our creative mind normally links back to something that we already understand. It's very rare that you creative something completely different. I actually fully agree with you, because I don't think parking population growth, artificial intelligence, if you look at that and you park that, it's not meant to be a scare factor and to spook everybody. It's meant to challenge you in terms of your thinking, because you're absolutely right, and I see it in my children, where they can have a full conversation, be on their phone, watch a soccer game all at the same time, and probably have 3 or 4 discussions on the phone at the same time. And some of you would be able to do that. People like Tinus and I probably stick to 2 or 3, but but in any event, you understand. So it's just for I think from a generation point of view, you're going to get that coming in. But even in that, appointing young people to drive some sort of innovation and creativity. For us, it's really, and I find it myself, we need to get into that creative space in our minds, which we don't necessarily do in terms of our age of generation of people. It's more difficult for us than it is for a 20-year-old, or for a 25-year-old, for a 15-year-old, because they're in that mode. And I think if we talk about the fourth industrialization process, we need to get into that space of challenging ourselves. And it's right. I mean, we, as humans, will adapt. It just means that we need to, for the older people, it's going to mean that you have to develop yourself. And I think that development of the individual is very key. What's going to be interesting is your whole economy worldwide is driven by consumers, consumer spend. So, the more consumers spend, the more the economy grow, and the more you can actually produce, etc., etc. So it's going to be interesting to see if some of that spend reduce because of computers, not necessarily if it's going to happen. Maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe it's just spent in another area. So that consumer spend and driving world economy, maybe there's going to be a restructure in time. But if it happens, it's going to be painful. When 2009 came around, everybody was saying this is like a big bubble. Then a lot of the Fed and a lot of the central banks worldwide pumped in more money to get the spend and the economies going. Now you've seen part of that is you see in your debt traps or in your debt numbers. So you can't continue to create debt in order to stimulate the economy. So it's going to be interesting when that happens, how that's going to impact the economy. And as you say, maybe there are our children, so we shouldn't be too worried when they lie around and want to be at home for 3 days. Look, I think that's the exciting part for Africa, isn't it? Because I think that is where we can play a role. That's why our focus is to make a difference in Africa, because we can honestly make a difference. If we understand it and we can create the right platforms, we can honestly make a huge difference in Africa. That's absolutely great. And like always, it's whether you see the opportunity in this or whether you see the fear in it or the negative part of it. So for us, I mean, we like to look at the opportunities. I mentioned this, I may have mentioned it last time, but even my second boy didn't fit the school box. But in any event, and then at one stage we had this huge debate about education. So he showed my wife and I a 1900s car, a 1970 car, and a car now. Found us a phone. You had obviously the dial phone and then the cell phone, and then they showed us the teacher in front of the classroom. 1970, and it's exactly the same. So it's not a teacher standing in front of the class. So, but it's interesting. I fully agree with you. I think the way that we educate, but I mean, bring it to our level, the way that we educate our workers, our staff, it's something that we fall short on. And to be quite honest, from a lot of the people, if you have an educational process or upskilling process, people just, I don't want to go, I understand what I need to do. So the motivation is not necessarily to go, and we don't necessarily create all the opportunities to develop that creative mind. So it's something, we are all my HR ladies, something that we need to look into. Yeah, so that's interesting because, I'm sure if I tell Tinus now he retires at 70 and not 63, Tinus, will you be excited? But I think you're right. I think that's exactly what we need to do. I think we exactly need to get to that point where we start to think differently. So I want to get back to the earlier point in terms of Africa. The opportunity for us as a company is exactly that. You sit with huge opportunity in Africa, which actually is a result of huge challenges in the rest of the world in terms of food production. Yes, we're going to have urban farming. I think governments around the world is going to put more and more money into it so that they can, cater for their own people. But it does mean that in terms of what we have in Africa, there's an opportunity. It's not an overnight opportunity because you need infrastructure, you need governments to buy in, you need us to make the right decisions and not make mistakes in Africa, which we do. But as long as we keep on going at it, and as long as we make sure that we create the right platforms, in my mind, and as long as we drive disruptive ideas, we will be there. Last year, actually not last year, the year before, I was at the AGM in Toronto with Fairfax, and they had a CEO's forum, and the one person they invited was a digital, Johan, you would have enjoyed it, but a digital guy that drives innovation. And he says that what companies need to do is you need to actually have people that only sit on driving innovation and hopefully comes up with so many new ideas. But by the time you actually find one idea that can change your environment, you need to almost spend or invest, well, he said probably a third to 50% of your capital into that idea to drive that change. So it's something that we try to do. I mean, we haven't got it right completely, but we're trying to do that, and we will definitely drive very hard our digital platforms. I mean, that's the one idea that Johan and the Unigrow team work quite hard on. And what we have there is something that we can really scale up, and that we will do with the bank. But I think the opportunity for us on other areas and be creative is what we need to do. So we have the opportunity. I fully agree. We shouldn't be fearful about the future. I wanted to give a bit of a sense for the environment that we're living in so that you can understand it. But also I want to challenge you in terms of your personal life. The way that we treat our children or the way that we think about the future for our families. How do you do that? And then lastly, I think if I can ask you to think creative about, the type of education you want, even if we are 50, or 60 or whatever. So to think about what you would want your own training and development, what you would like that to be, and then share that with your manager or your CEO. So that we get to a point where we start to develop our people. And if you don't ask for it, don't expect that we need to come to you and say, this is the offering. You know, sometimes we need to drive that change in that environment where we are. And if you can drive the change in your own environment, then we will all be better. Look, I'm not really one that listens to that, to be quite honest. So I'm not sure if you guys are, but I prefer actually not to listen to too much about, yes, I obviously read the newspaper and I listen to what everybody's saying from a politician point of view. You actually get different people, spreading different stories. I mean, you have your politicians, you have your business environment, you have your company environment, and you have your corporate politics. And it's unfortunate that in Africa even we have, or in the group or in South Africa, there are corporate politics. And if you listen to people, and it doesn't necessarily come always to me, but if you listen to what people are saying, it's unfortunate because it means that somebody is, when stories are flying around, people start to listen and react to it, and it's not always true, the stories that's flying around. And I think what I learned over time is that, and that comes back to emotional intelligence, is that you don't have to link yourself to those stories. It's a choice you have to make. Remember, in all of this, we have a choice. It's interesting, I want to tell you a story. My son had to do he studied BCom, he had to do a accounting test on a computer, on the web. So he went in, he did it, he got 85%, he did it again. It was like a couple of tests, but the prof only takes the best one. Or, well, I don't know how he decides, but in any event, prof only takes one of the. So he did another one, he got 92%, and then he said, well, I'm not going to say the prof, I'll ask him to do 4 or 5. And he said, well, I've got now 2, so the prof can decide which one to use. And then my wife and his girlfriend then say to him, well, you've got time, do another one because it's good, you're testing yourself, do another one. So he did another one, obviously not focused enough, and he got 56%. And for some reason, the prof decided that's the one he's going to use. So when I got home, he was very angry at my wife and his girlfriend. How did they convince him to do another test? And I said, boy, but you made the choice. You can't be angry at them, it's your choice. And the thing is with us, we make decisions, but because sometimes other people ask us to make their decisions, we're angry at them when it doesn't work out. And we need to realize the decisions that we're making for ourselves and for our families and for our business, it's only our decisions. You need to take that responsibility. So if I ask you to take responsibility for your education, and we sit here a year from now and you haven't done that, you can't complain and say, Jacob hasn't given you that opportunity, or Phil Africa, Roland hasn't given you that opportunity. You have to take that responsibility. And that's reaction. So if you ask me how do I manage it, I just ignore it, to be quite honest. I just keep quiet. I don't spend time on worthless discussions. Well, I do sometimes, but I try not to. But it's negative. If you think about it, any gossip out there is negative. So, why spend time on it? The politicians, I can tell you now what is floating around on the political side is going to change 10 times by the time the whole land issue is sorted. The one thing I can tell you, there's a specific focus from the president not to uproot or have a negative impact on food production and the stability on the country. The whole thing is actually to create that stability in the country. So I'm actually excited. Yes, to get there, you're going to have to go through these ups and downs and emotional turmoil. But if you look at that, if you look at the political environment, how many people actually considered moving to Australia 10 years ago, but still here? And actually, sometimes in some years it was better, and some years it was worse. This is my speech, so yeah, I did bring my iPad, so it looks good. But you know what? So I did a talk the other day, and I wrote my speech on paper, 8 pieces of paper, and then I took photos so that I can stand and flip and not lose the paper. But I don't know, to be quite honest. I think it's going to take a long time. I don't think I'll see it in my time here. The reason for that is more culture than it's necessarily ability to do it. You know, and the younger generations will drive that. You will drive that. You know, you're much younger than me, but the next generations will drive that. Unfortunately, I still see, you know, when I have my CEO's meetings, people bring paper, or, you know, I'll do paper, and it's just you used it. You know, for me, sometimes I'm trying to make that, you know, that change. So if I go to a board meeting now, we have diligence, which is a package that can then allow you don't have to print the board pack, and you can write on it. So it becomes more and more easier as technology changes. But sometimes, some other board meetings, I'll still print the pack and make comments on it. So yeah, it's maybe next 100 years. But it's something we need to drive. I mean, it's a cost saving, so you need to drive that. It's just getting people used to it is the chance. So I'll be honest with you. I think that we are moving in an area in the world where some parts is going to become more difficult. I don't mean that to fear people, to be negative. I do believe that we have a creator that looks after his children. But I don't think worldwide that it's necessarily going to be plain sailing. That's my feeling. And the one thing that you should do, you need to know your position within your relationship with your God, or your Creator, and draw, you know, peace from that. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to be prepared. I think also what we're doing is to make sure that we're prepared for whatever happens out there. So my preparation, in a sense, that I hope to achieve with a company like AGH or all the companies, is almost a much higher picture in terms of where to be positioned. It becomes more difficult because you have different management teams, but that's also the exciting part of it, because you have people thinking differently, challenging one another, which is good. I think we need an environment where people challenge one another, not negatively, but just debating things. You know, I don't have all the answers, and I do believe that there's no one person that has all the answers. But I do also believe that on a joint basis, we can come up with the right platforms, the right business models. We have wonderful people, very good people in the group. Not all that creative, but we'll get there. But I think ideally, if we can put all your ideas together, you know, we will be ready for the future, whatever that future brings. There's going to be challenges, but there's going to be awesome opportunities. I am one that believes there are great opportunities in chaos. You know, so instead of running away from chaos, you need to run to chaos. I think that you need to be in the center of the storm, not on the outskirts. And that's really what I hope to achieve in our process. You know, so yeah, I hope that answers the question. But I think from a spiritual point of view, that should create your base. You know, and then you need to build on that in terms of your focus. Thank you for making time this morning. I appreciate it. I hope it added a bit of juice to your day, a bit of creativity and thinking to your day. It wasn't really my intention to scare you, and I hope I didn't. I hope that you get a feel for where we are. So the population has grown by about probably 3 million while we were sitting. So it's amazing to see that. But trust you, by the end of the year, there's going to be another South Africa and a half on the continent that we need to cater for in terms of food production. Okay, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.